Very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It is 12:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Max Cohen. I am here with Daim Al-Yad, and this is your MOCA Weekly Town Hall. We'll be joined by Untitled XYZ and Renee in just a couple of minutes. But first and foremost, before we begin, Happy New Year. This is our first MOCA Weekly Town Hall of 2026, and we are so happy to have you with us. Daim, how are you?
Here. I'm good. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy New Year, Max. It is good to be back.
It's been a long time since we've got to chat about all the goings-ons in crypto art, or should I
Yeah.
say the lack of goings-ons in crypto art.
Yeah.
Anything
Went out with a bit of a banger last year, if I recall.
Remind me.
Oh, I think it turned into, a long and circuitous, or not circuitous, winding discussion about crypto art and its, I don't know, it demise into becoming digital art so as not to rub the crypto connection in people's faces and
That sounds about right.
people nonsense and so on and so forth.
Yeah. We were still basking in the afterglow of Art Basel Miami and the people.
Yes.
And all of that. Interesting how well, I mean, you're an artist, so here's a question I've always had for artists. At what point do pieces become classics? Not iconic, because I think that can happen in the moment, but like how long needs to pass before an artwork is considered legitimately like in the canon, right? There was all this buzz about, we're just gonna use it as an example because everyone knows what we're talking about, but like the Real Animals, the Beeple piece from Art Basel, like how long would that need to be talked about, studied, written about, etc., before it would become like part of the curriculum, so to speak?
I mean, I'll give my thoughts, but probably this is maybe more appropriately posed to like a, I don't know, like a historiographer or something.
Sure.
But I don't know. I would say, definitely longer than, crypto Twitter seems to think, because I feel like there's definitely been works that have had, a lot of hype around it only to sort of, maybe they're not completely forgotten even now, but feel like definitely they've begun their descent into oblivion. Like I don't know, like Beeple stuff in general comes to my mind. I feel like the degree to which they were hyped and the degree to which they were seen as everything, within crypto at least. I don't think we have that anymore. I don't think. Hey, Renee. I think a lot of times, as we discussed in our last, I think, broadcast of the year, too, a lot of times, the ticket price of art contributes just disproportionately to its perception of relevance and brilliance and value and let's be honest, that ticket price in crypto is even more likely to be sort of manipulated and contrived and speculative than in the traditional art world, which, I'm fairly sure still has that issue in some ways. But so to answer your question, I feel like I feel like probably like a decade is the absolute lowest end of what you need to like overcome, because if you create something and 10 years later, like it's barely remembered, clearly it's not lasting for the long run. um, but I mean, you know to make it into a textbook, um, and last and still be in a textbook 50 years later, um, I would think probably a few generations have to pass,
Renee,
right?
what's
Because you're going to have stuff in textbooks that's sort of very modern and relevant,
I mean,
but
you have
that'll be replaced by other stuff 10 years from now that's modern and relevant, because that older stuff no longer is.
maybe that's not a quality of crypto art. I mean, you guys have both been around this ecosystem longer than I have, but like, one of the defining characteristics is the fact that just like all of this art is created at such a much higher speed and frequency um, than any art movement in the past, right? There's just more to look at on any given day, and then as soon as something happens and it
Well,
captures
well,
the zeitgeist, it's replaced by something else that captures the zeitgeist, and
well,
there's
well, and that ephemerality is I think often it's almost intentional,
Mhm.
right? It's by design, and
It's part of the movement, right? It's part of being internet adjacent. It's part of being democratic. It's part of having, access and discoverability to all of these works from around the world. That there is this glut, but because there is such a glut, and because things are constantly being created from all these different vectors, especially we have someone like Beeple, who we were discussing before, who makes an artwork every day. The goal is ephemerality. The ephemerality has been internalized, but I wonder if that's going to make it more difficult for any given work to stick in kind of the canon, as opposed to individual artists. I mean, artists being kind of
I mean, I, I I think you're absolutely right about that, right? Like, I don't think you're gonna have, you know, I don't think you're gonna have a work that was, I am gonna say, thrown together in a day, have as much of a chance of becoming, the next, oh God, Mona Lisa, as something that was worked on with thoughtful intention for an extended period of time, and represents something deeper than whatever the fuck the artist thought of that day.
yeah. I mean, you think about like all of the kind of like art titans, so to speak, and they usually have like one piece that they're classically known by, and it doesn't mean that's their best work. It just means that there's always like one piece, and it's like when it's Van Gogh next to Starry Night, it is Da Vinci next to the Mona Lisa, it is Dali next to the Persistence of Memory. There's like one work that kind of like assigns itself to the artist's name and is just kind of understood alongside them, even in like really elementary discussions, really elementary understandings. And I wonder if that's even possible in a place like crypto art. Like, I don't think that. I mean, I think Beeple is actually a really interesting example here, because the work that he is most known for intentionally defies a specific aesthetic, right? It is this kind of glut of five different individual aesthetics and individual pieces. Um,
I mean, Beeple for me, hey, Untitled. Beeple for me, is in my mind at least, and I speak as a person who doesn't care very much about Beeple, but he is in my mind very strongly associated with the, what is it? Politics is bullshit. The image slash video animation of the bull.
yeah,
I think in the animated version, possibly actually shitting, um, which has, if I recall, three testicles, because the 3D model is just some random thing he pulled from some. I don't know if it was paid for or like a free asset, but apparently pulled from some random website that anybody else could have pulled it from, and I feel like at the time when this was initially discovered, it was briefly seen as something of an outrage, but quickly went away.
Yeah,
But that's what I associate with Beeple primarily. I'm
for
not sure
sure.
if
It would be interesting. I don't know, Untitled Renee, just using this as an example, we're purely as an exemplar. Um, do you have an association with a specific piece with Beeple? I would also be curious. These other kind of like, large name artists, maybe a next copy would just be another good example. But like, do you feel that there was one work that like is always kind of beside their name, or if it's kind of in crypto art, the name exists and there's no specific aesthetic or no specific work that like is conjured necessarily universally?
Interesting. I think there are a handful of, there's the naked Trumps, there's the kind of like phallic, muscular Elons. I think like I generally I don't know what we were talking about before.
Well,
I generally now I think I've had an arc with people over time, but I generally like his stuff.
so we were just talking about how the ephemerality of crypto art maybe does not lend itself to any specific piece being included in the quote unquote canon, right? Where it might be artists as opposed to pieces. And I had posited that you have like a lot of the kind of like iconic artists of the last, I don't know, 150 years, they have a piece that's attached to their name. So
yeah.
Dali has Persistence of Memory, Monet has the Water Lilies, Warhol has the Campbell Soups. Like there, you say the name of the artist, and one kind of piece is kind of universally understood as being like either most emblematic or most connected to their name. And I don't know if that's the case in crypto art. And the reason I brought up Beeple was because the 5,000 Everydays intentionally defies that, right? It really, even if you see that piece, nobody's going to have a specific relationship to any of the aesthetics. It's so much diverse visual information with these 5,000 panels. Daim had brought up the politics is bullshit as an example of a piece he always associates with Beeple. But more just kind of like when we get to this level of crypto artists specifically who have these, big names.
Well, digital artists, right?
Well, we can carry the torch for as long as we can. We still have some strength yet.
I always think of it's I don't even know what it's called exactly. It's probably like ripped Elon Musk walking Doge. I don't know. That like encapsulates. What's that, Renee?
I think he called it Chad Elon.
Chad Elon. Yeah, I think there's just a lot embedded in that image, and that's definitely like for Elon's kind of entry into crypto, Doge was such a big, I don't know. To me, it feels like that's an image that stands out in my mind for him, but definitely politics is bullshit is like very recognizable image early on in Beeple's career, or not career, but in his kind of entry into the crypto scene.
And I guess like I think of Dmitry Cherniak, it's like it's Ringers as a project less than any specific one. Maybe the Goose piece. With Tyler Hobbs, it's like generally Fidenza. With Sam Spratt, it's generally these Lucy paintings. But maybe that's the kind of indicative of the point, which is like a lot of these artists, because of the frequency with which they're either making works chronologically or the amount of works that come out of a single project where you have 1,000 pieces in a given collection, there is no one aesthetic or more kind of just like an emissary for either an idea or a collection of aesthetics. Like X copy, I don't think that there's a specific piece, like one piece that we would all agree upon, like this is X copy. The way that like everyone agrees that like may not be your favorite, but Starry Night is the Van Gogh piece that has like is etched next to his name, right? And people could say that it's like Last Selfie or what's the one where he's on the in the boat on the river Styx? Is that Last Selfie?
Oh my gosh, what's that one called? That one comes to mind with X copy for sure.
Yeah, for me as well.
But it very much depends on the steward. Like you have museums like the Louvre that champions Mona Lisa. You have where's Starry Night? Is that a that's not a MoMA?
It's a MoMA, yeah.
MoMA. like you have champions of specific art that make it, they put it on all the kind of like, you know, materials that go out to kind of advertise. I think you kind of,
Memetize it.
what's that?
Memetize it.
They memetize it.
They do. They let you right click save it. I think like, yeah, you for a lot of these classic and incredibly well-known artists, they have that kind of partner, and it's hard to do with crypto art at this stage because you have what goes viral, but I think we're still very early in this. So I'd be curious to see in like 10, 20 years, are the things that are as viral now or as recognizable now, are those the same pieces that those artists are associated with? I'm not sure they will be. It'll be interesting to see, because I think media now is so hard to keep at the surface, especially for artists. What is it that keeps and retains that kind of like mimetic power? I think people, because memes are so much his media, you're going to have different memes surface at different time periods or have different significance. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and it is interesting that a lot of these artists that we're talking about, it's their earliest works that become, you know, associated, or at least at the moment are associated with the iconography. I don't think anything Dmitry Cherniak after Ringers has had nearly the amount of impact or kind of iconic relevance that Ringers had. I don't know if Tyler Hobbs even makes works anymore outside of
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I don't know too much about Dimitri specifically, but like Tyler Hobbs didn't start doing art when he entered crypto. Like Tyler Hobbs has an art career that well precedes crypto, and I, you know, while I also don't know really what he's done since, I'm pretty sure he's been continuing to do things, you know, well after Fidenza to, you know, today and beyond.
But it's the case with a lot of these artists. I mean, even the pieces that we brought up, the Last Selfie and the other one that none of us can figure out the name of, unless that is Last Selfie, in which case we did figure it out. But like those are early Genesis Xcopy works, and yes, he was doing, you know, he had been creating art at least on Tumblr since, you know, like 2012 or so. But like those pieces, Coin for the Ferryman.
Yep.
Sorry. But like those pieces are among like the first couple of pieces ever minted on Super Rare, and so in a way they are among the first pieces that were like widely known by Xcopy in the space, which is I think the real animals thing with Beeple is interesting because it's not classical and it's not kind of necessarily, you know, I can thematically it's related to his earlier stuff, but in terms of form and it's, you know, it's more performance than anything else. It's not indicative of what came before, and so I wonder if like these things will have sticking power if, you know, artists start to break out of whatever molds they had like initially set themselves in.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just real quick, if it's all-time high in the city, and is the one Xcopy that I think of a lot there.
Which one?
That's the red River Styx one.
It's not Coin for the Ferryman?
Well, it is. It's based off of that, right? But it's called All Time High in the City.
All Time High in the City. Damn.
I wonder. I don't know if that's what you guys are checking. I had to turn away for a moment, but I wonder how these pieces that we sort of remember as being iconic, how they are in terms of like the most valuable works associated with the given artist. Because I feel like many of these are probably like, you know, even if not the very peak, but are probably quite close.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, sadly, reinforces the sort of, you know, financial entanglement of value perception.
Hard to know what's the chicken and what's the egg in this situation, though, right? Like, maybe that's the case with all art throughout history, right? What comes first, the value or the iconography? What I mean, at a certain point, it's a positive feedback loop, but like what happens first? Is it like the ubiquity of the aesthetics and then the value, or is it like this piece got bought for, you know, X amount of money, and so then it became iconic because of the sale price? I'm sure that that's the case.
Well, no, for sure, that's a legitimate question. Though I feel like in the case of crypto, like the manipulation and like, you know, wash trading is often like so blatant as to kind of suggest more decisively an answer for certain cases than usual.
There was a nice tweet from Trevor, our friend Trevor Jones, this morning. I don't know if this was mentioned earlier, and maybe feels like something like this is just on the minds of many. He said, "Culture forms in the margins, not the announcements," and that to me is very much about, you know, you have the prices and the parity of prices with artworks being the most well-known piece type of thing. Like, interesting kind of dialogue there. Obviously, I think we agree that culture is not the thing that makes it to the top of the froth.
Trevor Jones, however, is another example of this. No piece that he's created in the last 7 years has had the impact of Bitcoin Bull or the Bitcoin Angel.
Yeah.
All his earliest works are that which have settled in the zeitgeist, right? And not to say that Trevor Jones's more recent works aren't wonderful, but in terms of just like pure cultural impact and relevance and, you know, wide awareness, there's no comparison to those things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, what was it? The Angel, that was Nifty Gateway drop, right? That like, was it
I
Nifty?
think so, yeah. He also used that one for like invitations to the castle party, I think, or something.
Yeah.
Use
Well,
like
I think it
to
evolved
that.
into, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Fahim.
I'm here. I don't know what's happened.
You know, we have somebody named Harumph. Hello, Harumph. Talking in our chat and had brought up why cancel NFT Paris, and I think that maybe this is an interesting thing to talk about because this is probably the only real hard and fast news that has occurred in crypto art since the beginning of the year, which is the cancellation of NFT Paris and RWA Paris, which were, at least for the last 5 years or so, like pretty stalwart crypto art gatherings, right? Or at least stalwart like NFT gatherings, whatever you want to call it, Web3 crypto art NFT. Like this was one of the few places that regularly, yearly, annually attracted people to come hang out and create the culture that is happening on the margins, to use your
where else can crypto art get exhibited in the Louvre, right?
Oh, exactly. You know, at least to my knowledge, and I'm by no means an expert on in real life crypto art gatherings, but it was kind of like NFC Summit, NFT Paris, and NFT NYC were kind of the big three, right? They were at least these kind of like reliable bastions of gathering central locations. NFC still going on. Their founder and I think he's CEO or chairman, John Karp, mentioned that would happen this year. I don't know anything that's going on with NFT NYC, but I know that over the years it has become quite weakened in terms of how attractive it is to people coming into town and how relevant the things that happen there are. Excuse me. Sorry. Obviously, it really eats me up what's happening. But I don't know. Have any of you, first of all, been to NFT Paris? I had never gone.
Renee, did you?
I've been to NFT Paris twice.
How did it relate, or how did it compare to other kind of crypto art conferences? I've only been to NFT NYC, and then that Avalanche thing in Buenos Aires, but I'm not sure that counts.
I kind of liked it because, like, especially in 2024 when I was there, it was pretty small, and it was like still like the core believers. And then the other time I was there was 2022, which was more more mainstream stuff. Everything was a bit more hyped till at that point. When we talk about NFTs, I think the whole vibe there was both times pretty good. But in the end, if the attention around a topic called NFTs and you name the conference NFT Paris, and your primary how do you call it,
the thing
value,
or cultural
UVP, unique value proposition of like a conference organizer still includes something that nobody cares about, like then you obviously have a problem. And it was like pretty big, like the venue was pretty big, like it was sized in a way that it really requires a certain amount of visitors and a certain amount of traction, and also
right, the Grand Palais.
Yeah, and
Grand Palais.
I have no idea how much it costs to rent that for probably a week or so, with like building everything up, like tearing it down again. But yeah, if you cannot cover those costs and you don't want to be the 50-person or 100-person small event, or turn this large thing into the small thing because you have to do it, or you cut it down entirely, like, how would you come back to the big one? Like once you go that small,
I mean,
like I never organized a conference, so I'm not an expert in that, but just from a pure mindset perspective, cutting down from such a venue, if you do it like 5 times in a row, always there, and then you say like, okay, now let's meet in a small bar and call it NFT Paris,
doesn't have the same cultural cachet.
I don't think that works.
Yeah.
We in the last year, when the podcast was still kind of like pumping, a lot of the things that Colbert and I were talking about was like the difficulty of having a business in crypto art, NFTs. Like, operating a business here is in some ways much harder than being an individual here, because you are constantly asked to like produce value, right? It's becomes existential. You can't just like go into quiet builder mode. I spoke to John Karp, the founder of NFC Summit, for the piece I wrote a couple of months ago. And just something that came up casually was just like the difficulty of getting sponsors for these large events. And there is a one-to-one relationship between the difficulty of the financial environment, right? We are in crypto art, but it is by no means limited to crypto art, with these closures of businesses. And even if they're not closing, everyone's pockets are tightening. So without large financial interest in advertising and sponsorship, it is kind of impossible to do any of these things. This is the very basic way that all these conferences make money, all these gatherings make money. There needs to be some kind of like larger institutional actor that is, propping it up, so to speak. Ticket sales are just never going to completely cover the costs of like a giant investment, like renting out the Grand Palais in Paris for a week. Even renting out a bar for a week would be difficult without sponsorship. And so there's this one-to-one kind of relationship between like the ossification of the business environment, and the difficulty of continuous success in the business environment without a lot of investment coming in from outside, with kind of the degradation at the high level of like these cultural events. Better or worse, they require each other.
I mean, in my mind, I just don't know if these, like, you have the kind of onset of a new technology, a new culture, a new new internet things, and I feel like it makes sense to have these kind of meetups to really catalyze a lot of the early stages of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But once they start to mature, it almost feels like it goes back full circle then to like, it makes more sense to, you might have a conference or two maybe, but it should probably be including other things. And then by and large, most part, you should like meeting at a bar or a gallery or a park or whatever. That's how crypto art started. Like in Brooklyn, people would meet at bars and parks and galleries and do smaller sort of like roundtable discussions and things like that. And that was back in like 2017, 18. And those were fun and really like catalyzed the move. And then it obviously got big. People moved to Times Square to do things. But then, I feel like in the kind of like ebb and flow of adoption, then now I don't know if it makes sense anymore to do a lot of these things, to be honest. Then again, I'm speaking as somebody who really doesn't super enjoy a lot of these types of events, mostly because I just dislike Times Square. But I think, like, this is I think we all too often jump to the conclusion that it's failing. That's why these events are going away. I don't know if that's always the case, or I don't know if that's fully the case. I think it's more there's maturity as well, and then you can't have NFT. You can't have an internet conference.
Well, so somebody had said about the NFT Paris that like this last year they had kind of branched out right into more gaming, DeFi, collectibles, etc., away from this kind of like artistic route in the hopes of doing exactly what you said, right? Like casting a broader net and because of that catching more fish. And I don't know, it's interesting that always seems to be like a last gasp. And obviously it didn't work super well in this circumstance. If we're judging by the fact that they're not hosting their event this next year. I think the broader question is like, we have spoken a lot over the last 6 to 8 months about the institutionalization of crypto, period, right? The greater and greater ownership of crypto assets by people who are not invested in the crypto ecosystem, whether that is, retail traders who are buying, IBIT ETF on Schwab and not interacting with anything downstream of crypto, certainly not downloading a wallet, whether it is, BlackRocks and Grayscales, these giant banks and hedge funds who are controlling these ETFs, who are buying and buying and buying and buying. But there is much larger ownership of the crypto ecosystem by people who are not engaged in the crypto ecosystem. They want exposure to it, but they don't want to be inside of it. And so it is like the tide is actually being sucked out of the movement. And you can see how boots on the ground cultural advancement is not, like, even if crypto is doing well, even if crypto is becoming more central in like, external culture, the kind of nourishment that is required of, these movements, whether it's the RWA movement, the real world asset movement, whether it's the crypto art movement, whether it's the broader NFT ecosystem that are happening in the margins, to invoke our friend Trevor Jones, like they are not being tended to by the people and entities that are entering into crypto. One of the things that was for me a characterization of the 2021 kind of bull mania was that the only way to get exposure really to these assets, and the best place, like, it was NFTs was the thing, right? That was where the derivative market was. That was where all the speculation was. That's where the money could be made. And that required some investment in the crypto environment, right? You couldn't buy an NFT on Coinbase, right? You had to download a wallet. You had to fund that wallet. You had to be on crypto Twitter. You had to go kind of into the trenches if you were going to get anything out of it. Today, that's just not the case.
Right.
The more that a Binance or a Coinbase integrates with this vast glut of different coins and different investment opportunities, the less and less necessary it is to actually engage with the community in any real sense, or to even be aware that there are cultures being built here.
Yeah, I think it's dilution of a technology that's being adopted. It's being spread out. It's being, you have different types of, to your point, passive investors, passive participants. Like, I think that's kind of part of the adoption curve. But yeah, I don't know. I think, back in the day, like when people really wanted to get into NFTs, you really had to like find somebody you trusted to like.
We were like minting NFTs. Like I was minting projects on Solana. And it's like the only way you could find out about that was to be on Twitter. When fucking Solamas were one of the first, NFT projects on Solana. When that minted, you had to know what it was. That wasn't going to just be listed. It wasn't going to be written about anywhere. It wasn't going to be listed anywhere. You had to be on crypto Twitter to see what it was, to get the link. Then you had to connect your actual wallet. Then you had to actually have money in that wallet in order to mint these assets. You had to actually be able to connect those assets to whatever the NFT platform was at the time if you wanted to sell them. It required a lot of not super effortful, but semi-consistent interaction with the actual technological and cultural institutions that we're forming here.
Yeah, you had to trust a group of people. You had to be in a group chat or in a, follow the right people and not the scammers to kind of figure out, which is, the amount of money that people were transacting on some of the volume for these NFT collections. You look back on some of those stats and it's just heinous. It's crazy. But it's yeah, I don't know.
I think I think my sort of vision of I don't know. I guess that my vision for crypto arts, maybe next big phase. I see it coming when eventually the like dim-witted Luddite anti-NFT hate wears off, and all the institutional buy-in has normalized crypto enough that there starts to be some casual gravitation towards it again by like, sort of average-ish, but, tech aware or tech savvy people. And then maybe there will come a point. I'm not convinced there will ever come a point where there'll be like Dutch tulip craze style interest, but maybe there'll come a point where suddenly the market for reasonably priced crypto art and fun crypto collectibles will, slowly, like 10 times over the course of, a year or two, and then 10 times again a year or two after that. And
I was
and sorry, go on.
I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and he had brought up Kevin Roos. You guys know Kevin Roos? He's a tech writer for the New York Times.
Yeah.
He has a podcast called Hard Fork, which is all about tech stuff. Of course, I know hard fork as a terminology from crypto, right? Hard forking a chain away from itself. But from what my friend was telling me, the origins of that podcast were in cryptocurrency. They had initially envisioned it as a crypto podcast, which makes sense given the name. They're initially going to call it Not Gonna Make It. And it's interesting, I think, to think about that when that podcast by a very acclaimed tech writer, emerged in 2020, 2021. The thinking was that the podcast was going to be about crypto, that crypto was the next wave, that it was going to be around, that it was going to be important, that there was going to be stuff to talk about within this ecosystem for enough time for the New York Times to approve or greenlight a podcast on it, right? I think
Dun dun dun.
Well, it's interesting to talk about this with NFTs because like NFTs had the entire, bell curve spiral of nothing to massive, or not bell curve spiral, the bell curve kind of pattern of nothing to massive interest and cultural awareness back to nothing. Even though for a moment it seemed like it was going to be ubiquitous at some point, right? And all of the arguments that were made at the time for NFTs were so compelling. Everything was going to be tokenized. Everything was going to be, all these real world assets were going to be turned into digital iconography. People were going to spend more and more time online. They were going to want more and more ways to identify themselves online, so on and so forth. The same kind of arguments that could have been made for crypto. And I think in many places, are still being made for crypto. But I don't know.
I think the mania brought the downfall, though.
Sure.
Like I think if we had a less steep ascent, there maybe wouldn't have been such an intense and intensely anti what is it like
Flash?
antithetical. Anyways, there wouldn't have been such an unfavorable view of anyone and everyone involved with crypto being dumb crypto bro with 80,000 cartoon apes and no common sense.
But this is the case with with three technologies, right? It was crypto. I'm going to use NFTs as an offshoot of that, but crypto we'll use for it. Crypto, NFTs, and the metaverse and AI, right? All kind of experience the same cycle, where there was this massive hype around them, and people formed an automatically negativistic interpretation of the technology. And then the only one to, I think, really get out of that is AI, which is not to say there's not a super negative interpretation of the technology. It's only that everybody with all these other three technologies seemed to be waiting for the case to be made that the technology was undeniable, right? It's like, oh, you may hate NFTs, but they're going to be undeniable. You're not going to be able to avoid them. You might hate the metaverse on first glance, but it's going to be so ubiquitous, that you're not going to be able to do anything without it, right? You're going to have to engage. That's happening with AI in the sense that, like, well, the technology actually is undeniable, right? It is so good at what it does. It actually is ubiquitous. You actually are, even if you hate it, you're still using it probably in some respect, right?
Well,
I mean, it's starting to happen with tokenized financial stuff too.
Yeah, like tokenization broadly, like definitely, I think the attitude now is that it is inevitable. It makes sense. It's cheaper and more effective and more liquid, more accessible. Like I think traditional finance institutions are seeing that now, and they're like, I mean, JP Morgan, among others, announced that they're going to be doing ETFs and stuff like that.
However, this is the question, right? Is like, what happens on the long curve, right? You have the initial baseline, you have the fervor, you have the drop off, and then what happens over here, right?
You have growth. I mean, it's you have adoption, and but I think
you have actual organic growth that makes sense. That's happening for the right reasons, and not because you're hoping that you end up with one of those $100 cartoon monkeys that will sell for 80,000 as well.
Cryptocurrency itself, right? Tokenization itself is the only one of these assets, or only one of these technologies, rather, that has been around for more than 5 years, right? Been around. I know that NFTs were created earlier, but been around in a cultural sense for more than 5 or 6 years, right? It was basically like 2020. I mean, we consider the Genesis collection pieces made before January of 2021, because that's kind of when that technology gained like a cultural foothold. So if you consider that, crypto had its first kind of coming out party in 2017, it's almost a decade old. These other technologies didn't have their coming out parties until 2021, until 2023. AI is still having its coming out party. Crypto is the only indicator of what that long tail could look like, with a very culturally hyped boom and then bust kind of trend line, I suppose you could say. Like that's our the only information we have, the only predictive information we have comes from crypto and tokenization. So yes, I think you guys are right by saying that, like, now we are seeing this adoption. Now we are seeing that maybe the technology was inevitable, but it's some years after the last kind of like wave of real hype.
Well, you have the .com boom. I think is the like most classic example of a adoptive technology. You have the boom in 2000, 2001, right? And then or crash. And then like 2006, 7 boom in apps, like that really catalyzed. It took a few years for basically people to figure out how to monetize effectively, scale a business, and have adoption. I think it's... So I think that's a good kind of like visual graph for how any of these things will really work. AI, I struggle with, because it feels to me like, we listen to the same podcast on this, The Last Invention.
Very good.
And it could be just that, the last invention. So it might have a very irregular adoption curve because people are so feverishly like companies. We've talked about this in our discussions, that it's almost like a wartime effort, the way countries are basically pouring money into AI. I think that'll get even more feverish because people don't want to be left behind. And it's like a national security risk. It's like a cultural risk. It's a systemic challenge, is this kind of like this new frontier. So yeah, I don't know. AI is interesting when you compare it to typical technologies of like adoption curves. I think, to me, I think it'll act a little bit differently because or it might have the biggest boom of all time over the next few years.
I think that I lump these technologies together and leave out things like the .com boom or the social media boom, because I think that the way technology is going to be adopted, or I think the way technology has been adopted and discussed and then internalized and externalized, changed fundamentally with the takeover of social media, right? Like once social media became the place where this information spreads, where people learn more about it, where they become invested, the very fact that we needed to be on crypto Twitter, the very fact that most of the metaverse development was happening in Discord channels, like that, I think does set all of these like post kind of like 2012, 2013 technologies in their own kind of category. And so that's the only reason that I kind of like lumped those things together, is because they all existed within the same kind of ecosystem where information spreads, travels, where groups form, where like ideas spiral outwards almost exclusively on social media. And maybe you're right. Maybe like uniquely AI is outside of that channel.
We shall see.
Anyways, I'm glad that we are now at a nice pausing point, because it's 12:50. I have to kick off a little early today, so maybe we can all kick off a little early today. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you Untitled. Thank you Daim. Thank you Renee. Thank you Hiram for being in our chat. Thank you Shivansh Rawat for hopping in and saying hello about an hour ago. We'll be back next Thursday at our usual time, and then things are going to get wonky, but we'll keep you abreast of when we'll be back here. Gentlemen, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you everyone for watching, and see y'all next week.